Beethoven's Eighth Symphony, which was paired very much in his mind with the Seventh Symphony, is sometimes portrayed as the most normal, the most conventional of his symphonies. I don't see it that way. I see it as certainly a tribute to Haydn, whom he had lessons with and who probably didn't really understand or approve totally of the direction that Beethoven was developing towards. And Beethoven sometimes parodied Haydn's music. But here with Haydn long since dead, it's a genuine tribute to the magnificent musician that Haydn was. And the signs of conventionality are there, but they're not the whole story of the symphony at all. It opens in the most direct way possible. There's no slow introduction. You're smack into the opening movement, an allegro, and it's like a door flies open and you're in the midst of a wild party going on. Actually, the manuscript looks pretty trouble-free to start with. Allegro vivace con brio. It certainly has brio. And here we go. This for a Beethoven manuscript is about as neat as he ever got. I mean, he never drew bar lines very clearly. They all had a bit of a wobble. Here we get the first of a few crossings out. And it's very precise. I mean, he writes out ritardando. He doesn't even just write rit. He writes ritardando on every single line, and arco. It's very much more precise. And then he's writing sforzandos, this forest of sforzandos, which is his hallmark, if you like. But one gets the impression that it was very fresh in his mind, and he had much less difficulty pinning the butterfly to the board, as it were, in this symphony than say the Pastoral Symphony, where everything is an agony for him to get it right. When we get to the second movement, he is really enjoying himself. He's having fun because he's taking the new invention by Menzel of the metronome and saying, "Yes, Mr. Menzel, I can deal with this," and so a completely mechanical articulation in the woodwind instruments. But then he sends it up by putting this lovely little dance fragment in the violins. And then a pizzicato dialogue going boom, 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 boom between the second violins and the violas. And great fun. And then he brings everything to a sort of great big false climax with a... It's as though he's had an absolute Jupiter pluvius of a sneeze. And he can't have been the greatest company sometimes when he was ill or when he had a very heavy cold. And he's putting the cold right smack into the music.
Come on, blow your nose.
Beethoven is not writing autobiography. He's somebody who's capable of being in the most desperate slough of despond, of despair, and then writing extremely happy music, and vice versa. Somebody, sometimes when he's actually feeling rather good about life, he can write deeply tragic music. It's too facile to just make a simple correspondence between the two things. If we believe, which so many of us do, that these symphonies are in fact evergreen pieces, that they are not just period pieces that reflect the fascinating times in which Beethoven grew, but have a message or have a content and have a substance that can enchant and inspire us, it puts that responsibility on us to find ways to reconstruct that imaginary orchestra that he was writing for. And it's impossible to do it. There's no recordings of it, of course. And if we did have recordings, we'd be shocked and horrified, no doubt. What we do have is descriptions of those first performances that were done in Paris and which were breakthrough for so many of the great later Romantic composers of the 19th century. Chopin, Berlioz, Clara Schumann, who reported it to Robert, and Wagner and so on. And also we have the instruments. We know what type of instruments were current then. It was a period of transition from basically what one would describe as Baroque instruments to the modern sonority of a symphony orchestra. This is a transitional phase where instruments are changing in terms of their technology and in their power to project, and in terms of the development of an individual timbre for a clarinet, an oboe, a flute, and for horns and so on, bassoons. They are very, very specific in their sounds. If we try and piece together an orchestra of Beethoven's period, particularly a French orchestra, and that is the model that I've used for the Orchestre Révolutionnaire Romantique, which I founded 30 years ago deliberately and intentionally to express and to reconstitute what I imagine and what the players imagine to have been as close as we can get to Beethoven's own sound world. Then he writes a very winning but more conventional minuetto. It says tempo di minuetto, not a scherzo. There's a feeling that this really is a genuine 18th century minuet, and I feel that this symphony has more 18th century in it than the first symphony. And then the last movement is just preposterous, especially if you get anywhere near the tempo indication that he indicates, which is semi-breve equals 84, which is you just can't get close to it. We've tried, and other people have tried. The closest I can get to it is around about 80. It's not far off. And if you're not careful, it can just become a jumble. It has to be so well defined. It's not simply the speed that matters, it's the subversive notes in it. I mean, there's this absolutely ridiculous C sharp that comes in. For a movement that's in F major, you don't expect a C sharp. And there is a C sharp unison from the whole orchestra. And you think, well, what on earth is he doing here? And it's only gradually that you realize that he's actually making use of that C sharp as a part of his thematic armory. And yet, within this driven fury of a movement, there are moments when he smiles. Very, very lyrical and gentle. And again, if you take too fast a tempo, you're screwed. You're absolutely finished. Reluctant, as I've been right from the word go, to see any of these pieces as directly autobiographical, there does seem to be a possibility that in writing such an apparently extrovert and joyous piece, that Beethoven might actually have been indulging in a bit of self-therapy, because he's going through an awful period of time. The death of his brother leaves his nephew, Karl, with a very difficult mother whom Beethoven doesn't get on with, and Beethoven in locus parentis. And it causes him desperate problems because of the row with the mother, because his reservoir of emotion, which has never been able to be consummated, is all channeled now towards his nephew, and he swamps poor old Karl with his obsessive, protective love. And it gets him into court cases. Beethoven, it drives Karl almost to the point of suicide. Well, he does attempt suicide. And again, as so often in his life, and he admits this, that music is the release. It's his way of dealing with all these desperate traumas and pressures.